Welcome to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast with Darren Mitchell. If you're a sales leader looking to take your leadership to a whole new level, then this is the podcast for you. We'll be exploring tips, techniques, and strategies to help you take your leadership to the exceptional level and allow you to enjoy more money, more meaning, and better sales results. Welcome back to the Exceptional Sales Leader Podcast, and a very special welcome to a man sitting in Kansas. Well, actually, he said Kansas City. Well, it's a Thursday after. No, it's a Thursday here. What am I talking about? It's getting ahead of myself. It's a Wednesday evening in Kansas. The Managing Director of Raincatcher, Mr. Cameron Bishop. Welcome to the podcast.
Great, Darren. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome, and thank you for joining. I was just telling you, This is probably going to be episode about 820, and here I am saying I must make sure it's a professional introduction, and here I am just tripping up all over my words. What it tells me is that you don't have to be perfect. You just keep going. Just keep going. This is an authentic conversation. So Cameron, I very much appreciate you jumping on. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. You currently run a business called Raincatcher, which helps entrepreneurs buy and sell marketable or remarkable companies and preparing organizations for sale. But you've also got a fairly extensive list of credentials and experience in business. So I'd love to delve into some of your philosophy, some of your approaches, particularly when it comes to running big companies, but also preparing companies for sale, and what are some of the things that people should be looking at. Before we jump into all of that, can you just give us a little bit of background in terms of where this all started for you and what led you to, I guess, to create and do what you do today?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that setup. So I have admittedly, a very unusual career path. Sometimes things happen in serendipitous ways. So I went to the University of Missouri School of Journalism, which is highly recognized. And I figured I would spend my career as an advertising copywriter working in advertising agencies. But I started my career in a small technical magazine publishing company. And it was only about a $7 million business. Mm-hmm. And I found myself about 2 years into that, a large group of employees sort of mutinied and left all in one day.
Wow.
And that, in a small business, that left a lot of really key open positions. So the CEO of the company looked at me and pointed his finger and says, "Okay, you're now the director of marketing." And at the same time, that involved managing salespeople. And I had no clue how to do that, although I had sold advertising in the college newspaper. So I knew a little bit about that. But I inherited a team of seasoned salespeople. Here I am, 23 or 24. And I've got a team of salespeople all over the country. At that time, all male, all in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Mm-hmm. So I knew the only way I was going to be able to earn their respect was to out-organize them and outwork them. And of course, you can see I have a lot of gray hair, Darren. So this long predates anything related to the internet and text messaging and cell phones, etc.
Yeah.
So I set about to set up systems and processes and track and document these guys until I could hold them accountable and earn their respect. I knew I had to earn their respect. It wasn't something that I could just try to, crack a whip and say, "Hey, I'm your boss. You got to listen to what I say." So you learn a lot from that. And then I began to travel with them on the road for, 4 to 5 days at a time. And I had the advantage of learning from many of them in terms of some of the sales processes and tactics they used. But at the same time, I could see where there were gaps, and I was able to help improve them by changing some of their either processes or procedures, or providing them with the sales collateral that they really needed to be more effective. And I began to move up the food chain in the company, and we were sold, and the acquirer said, "Hey, we like you guys. We want you to buy companies." And it was like taking the proverbial 6-month-old baby and dropping him or her in a swimming pool and saying, "Swim. We're not going to tell you how to do it. Just go do it." So the very first deal I did, I ultimately screwed up terribly. not because we couldn't deal with financial audits and that sort of thing, but I did not understand the value of understanding and reading and listening to people. And that became an invaluable skill for later managing salespeople as well as future companies that we acquired. So over time, we built that company from 90 employees to about 2,100 employees. We had a sales force of, I'm going to guess I remember it was like 220 to 250 people all
Mhm.
over the country, 5 or 6 foreign countries. And so sales became a very compelling and success factor in the growth and appreciation in our company. So we grew that business from $7 million when I started there. I ended there after 23 years. Last 2.5 years or so as the CEO, and we were a $400 million business with
Wow.
$100 million in U.S. EBITDA profits. I started a business from scratch, partnered with the giant bank JP Morgan Chase, their private equity group, and we built another company from zero to about 120 million. We had about 500 employees and probably 60 to 80 salespeople. So I learned a lot over the years about how to structure sales operations, how to create compensation plans, how to identify and hire top quality sales talent
Mm.
and keep them motivated as well as help continue to teach them. So it's an unusual track. And I consulted for a number of years. I did a very complicated turnaround on a struggling, failing uh, in the US, which is called a 501c3 business, which is a charitable company, about $60 million business. That ended during COVID. And I said, well, I get bored easy. What do I like to do? I bought 50 plus companies, spent $500 million doing that. I like buying and selling. So I found Raincatcher, which is based in Denver. We were very aligned on mission, vision, values, and ethical standards. And I joined that firm about 5 years ago to help business owners at the time they're ready to sell their companies.
Wow. That is a very interesting pathway. And I remember you made a couple of comments there, which I want to sort of delve into a few of those. One of them was dropping a 6 month baby into a pool and say, good on you, go and swim. Um, the first question I wanted to ask you, as a 23-year-old leading that sales team where you had people at 40, 50, and 60 who were probably well-seasoned salespeople, and you said something very interesting that you spent 4 or 5 days out in the field with them. And you're very, very clear on I needed to build respect with them so I could earn the right to, and you didn't say this, but I'm hearing earn the right to lead them and then the right to be trusted. Through that process, what did you learn about yourself? Because you're learning something that like that at an early age, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I'm sure that was a lesson that you've sort of taken forward and used over and over again. Because you've mentioned a number of times through that introduction the importance of understanding people. So I do want to delve into that a little bit. Um, if you look back to the process you went through, where you, let's just say metaphorically, you are that 6 month old baby in the pool, because all these people have left in the one day, and you say, right, I'm like the last man standing. Um, was there anything specific? Was it just innate? Was there something that you've been brought up to believe? Was it a value set? Was it something that you had seen or heard that prompted you to invest time and be with your team in order to build that level of respect?
Yeah, I'd say, well, from a standpoint of having any sales skills or understanding of sales myself, I paid my way through college and I spent most of that time working in men's clothing stores, selling clothing. So again, you're working with people all the time. You get to a way where it was a lot of it was commission based. So
Mm.
you're motivated to learn really fast about what kind of person is this, what kind of clothing are they going to want, and how do I achieve or help them achieve their goal of, looking better or getting that new suit or whatever it might be. And the first retail company I worked for had a special incentive program where if you sold a customer, let's say it was a suit or a sport coat, slacks, whatever, there was a shoe department that was outsourced And if we could suggestive sell a pair of shoes to that individual, again, this is many, many years ago, we got $1.
Okay.
Well, at that time, $1 was worth a lot. And so I was highly motivated, again, trying to pay my way through school. Man, I sold a whole lot of shoes because I had that incentive to do so. And that's part of what I learned going forward is that you get the behavior that you incentivize.
Mm.
And again, I was highly motivated because there was $1 for that pair of shoes. And I applied that across my whole career. But again, learning to read people is part of that. And you also have to get to know them on a personal basis.
Mm.
It's not strictly a business transaction. I mean, I knew again, in the early days, they were all male, but over time, it actually transitioned where all of my sales teams were probably 60 to 70% female because I
Okay.
found in general, it's always a general thing, it's not a unique thing, but we're generally better salespeople.
Hmm.
But in any case, I knew their spouses if they had one, I knew their kids, I knew what school they were in. And by traveling with them on a regular basis, I'd be on the road a lot.
Mm.
Again, working 3 to 5 days, I set certain expectations for them because I didn't want to waste my time to have 2 sales calls in a day. And we were out making face to face calls at client offices. So I would set a hard mandate that I wanted 3 to 5 calls a day.
Yep.
And we would go into these calls and I would say, I'm not going to lead the call. I'm the
Yep.
boss, but this is your client. So I would listen. I would drop in things where the credibility of the senior person could add credibility or value to the call. But then once we finished the call, we would go back to the car because we were driving, especially like in California, which is a tough
Mm.
market from a time distance travel standpoint. And we would rehash the call. What did you do well? What did you do well? What did you miss that could have enhanced the value of that call?
Mm.
What could you have left out? That sort of thing. It wasn't demeaning in any way. It was all about trying to improve. And that was beneficial. And for them to have a second set of eyes and ears listening to them and not trying to overrun them in
Yep.
front of their client, it was very valuable. And those factors of knowing them personally, them knowing me personally as a person, not just as their boss,
Yep.
uh, we created a very cohesive, collaborative team because of that.
I love that because there are a lot of sales leaders today that I go into companies and work with that spend their time in an office behind a closed door looking at spreadsheets and forecasting or looking at a CRM system. And I'm sitting there scratching my head and saying, why aren't you out there with your team? Why aren't you building relationships? Why aren't you adding value? You can't add value by sitting behind a screen,
Yeah.
managing upwards. And I call it respectfully navel gazing, Cameron. They're navel gazing. They're not adding any value. So I love that spending time in the field, adding value, edifying the salesperson in front of the customer, and particularly if they were more senior, more experienced. Because one of the questions I had on the top of my in the top of my mind where there was being younger. I think you mentioned you're about 23 when you were the head of marketing and sales and running the sales team. Dealing with people who are more experienced, I know it would have taken time to build that credibility. Were there many challenges you had to face in terms of maybe people within your team that were saying, well, hang on, who is this young whippersnapper? What does he know? I've probably forgotten more things about sales than he's ever known. Were there any challenges you had to face through that process?
Oh, yeah. That is absolutely the case. And I don't know if you're familiar with the concept called imposter syndrome. So anybody who
Yes.
takes on any kind of a new role, you know, you just don't know. I mean, I'll admit a lot of times I was scared to death, but I just figured that if I could be honest, direct, sincere, and frankly outwork them,
Hmm.
that over time they were going to get better. I was going to learn from them. And arrogance and ego cannot get in the way of that. You have to be able to accept certain kinds of feedback or suggestions from them.
Mm,
And if you can hear, they know you're hearing them, and you can either adapt or adopt those, then they're going to know you're listening to them and that they are making a greater contribution than just closing a sale.
mm. I love that. I love that. Um, I love the ego part because I have seen a number of sales leaders that have been promoted into a position, but often they've been promoted because they were a fantastic salesperson. They haven't necessarily chosen to be a sales leader. They've been anointed a sales leader, maybe through similar circumstances as to what you found yourself in, but they can't let go of the need to be center stage, to let go of the one that has to be closing the deal, who has to be seen as the head honcho or the big deal closer. And for many, it's very difficult to overcome that and to humble themselves to say, hey, I'm going to give the credit to my salesperson and build that person up rather than take the accolades for myself. So I'm
Yeah,
glad
it's
you mentioned
actually
that.
yeah, it's actually very true. And again, across my career, and I spent 35 plus years in management positions and running companies. And it was a rare circumstance where I made the decision to actually promote a top performing salesperson into a management position. Now, there's exceptions always, for
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
but most of the time I found that the skills that made a salesperson highly successful were counter to the skills required to be in a management position. Uh, Again, coaching is a key example of that.
Mm,
Most of the salespeople, not all of them, were not particularly organized. They were very people oriented, they were very competitive,
mm,
but those weren't necessarily skills that were going to ingratiate them as a, whatever it is, a director of sales or a national sales manager or what have you. So
yeah.
I was always very cautious to really fully know and understand that individual before we would consider them taking them out of a key role. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, the single best salesperson I ever worked with, this guy was brilliant. When I was running a $400 million company, he made more money than I did
Yeah.
on his commissions. And he once told, and we became very good friends. And I can't even count the amount I learned from him about just traveling with him and watching him go through a very regimented, disciplined sales process. But he once said to me, because I would have loved to have moved him up, made him a vice president.
Yeah.
And he's just said to me when I first approached him, and he said, Cam, I'm going to tell you this right now. If you ever try to promote me out of a sales territory, I will quit on the spot, because he knew exactly where his skills were. He knew where he was making his money. He had tremendous respect from the customers in that market.
Mm,
He didn't want to manage people. He had
yeah.
no desire and would have gained no satisfaction from doing that. So I never promoted him. I just let him be him, and he until he decided to retire. He's the best salesperson I ever worked with in 35 years.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. I'm glad you shared that because there are so many companies that will simply promote, and one of the key criteria, minimum criteria, is they have to be smashing their sales number. So it's almost like to be given the opportunity to lead teams, you've got to be a wonderful salesperson, not necessarily the number one salesperson, but you have to be very, very good at what you do. But a lot of organizations neglect to actually ask the individual, is sales leadership the thing you would actually like to do? Is that in your future career plans? And if not, then I'm not going to ask you to do that because I'm probably setting that person up to fail, but also setting the company up to fail because all of a sudden you're going to lose a great salesperson and you're putting somebody in a role that they don't really want to have, which starts to then permeate down, and you start to have a deconstruction of the sales psyche.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Derek. That's exactly what happens.
So with that, and you mentioned you're in you spent 23 years. I think it was Intertech. It was the company, $400 million company. Is that
Yeah,
the?
23 years. Yeah, it was called Intertech Publishing. We published 100 different technical trade journals from everything from agriculture to high tech topics and electrical repair, coal mining. I mean,
Hmm.
you can name it. Every profession has a technical trade journal. We published 100 of those. We had a trade show and conference division that did industry trade shows and conferences for education. That was about a $40 million line of our business, and we had a technical book publishing business, a lot of how-to manuals, valuation guides. We had 300 different titles in that library as well. So that was the nature of that business. And we
Nice.
had 23 offices around the U.S. and I think we had one in England, and we had sales teams in about 6 or 8 different foreign countries.
Nice. And so I'm really interested in the transition after spending 23 years there and growing that business to a $400 million business. You mentioned that you started from scratch again and had JP Morgan Chase as a, I guess, a strategic partner with you, and starting Ascend Media, I believe, is the company, Ascend Media.
That is correct.
So
Yes,
growing
sir.
that to 100+ million in 3 years. I'm really curious in terms of the lessons you're able to take from Intertech, because you've mentioned a number of times the importance of knowing your people. So I wanted to delve into this people element of building businesses, scaling businesses, and particularly identifying talent. How much of the, I guess, the rapid growth and the success of Ascend Media do you put down to the lessons you learned at Intertech, but maybe even prior to that, to enable you to take advantage of talent, to be able to spot talent, to be able to utilize people in their strength zones? That was a catalyst for that, I guess, that really quick growth and that expansive growth. Because there's a lot of companies out there that don't achieve anywhere near that growth trajectory, and they probably wonder what the hell's happened. We've got lots of money, we've got a great product, but it's just not happening.
Yeah, so I'll break that down into about 3 different topics. So the first topic, in terms of one of the key factors in building Intertech, I mentioned it earlier. Ego and arrogance can't enter the equation. So to build Intertech, we acquired somewhere around 35 businesses.
Hmm.
And in many cases, when one company is buying another company, the acquiring company takes on the attitude that we're buying you, we're right, you're wrong, it's our way or the highway. And that is a prescription in almost all cases for either failure of the integration or a very unsuccessful integration. So I mentioned the first deal I did, I screwed up badly. I got a PhD in how to do deals from those mistakes. We almost all learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes. And that was one in that case. So it comes back again to reading and understanding people.
Yeah.
So in the companies we acquired, we would go through a very disciplined process. We would do all of the typical, analytical work, reviewing the financials, the human resources and benefit plans and all that sort of thing. But we spent a significant focus on assessing the people. And we had a program we called, or that we developed over time, that was very successful, called Start, Stop, Keep. Pretty simple. We would meet with at least the top management of the acquired company, usually at least the middle management. In some cases, we met with every single employee. We would sit down privately with them so they couldn't be influenced by other management in their company, and would say, okay, what do you like about your business? What do
Yeah.
you want to make sure we continue to do,
Hmm.
keep doing? Then we would ask them, what would you like to see the company start doing? And it's amazing how many times you would get great ideas on how to build that business from people that you wouldn't think of that had tremendous insight into the company.
Mm.
And if we adopted those ideas, we had instant gratification and respect from those people because they knew they'd been heard and they
Mm.
made a contribution. Then by the time we got to what do you see the company want to stop doing, which is the negative in those three, we actually already knew the answer before we even got there. So we would look at all those aspects and we would then identify best practices that they were executing because we bought them because they were doing something right.
Mm.
That's where the value was. And we would, on virtually every deal, adjust our overall set of practices and processes to adopt the successful elements of the acquired company. And
Mm-hmm.
you immediately begin to get their respect. They're not as scared of what's going to happen or hesitant, and they become more rapidly ingrained in your corporate culture. But you also have to understand their corporate culture so that you can respect that as well. And again, they become part of your team.
Mm.
So we built a tremendously over time from originally 90 employees to over 2,000 uh, to became very collaborative, and it was very much a family atmosphere with significant communication to our teams at all times.
Mm.
And that created a big part of that overall successful environment and why the margins, the EBITDA margin of that business was several percentage points higher than industry average because we had incorporated all of these best practices in the process.
Yeah.
But when I left and started Ascend Media, there would have been a change in the senior management of our parent company, and the culture began to change immediately. So over time, when I launched my new company, two of my senior executives, one who was also my best friend at that time, a brilliant sales senior level executive, and a financial manager, they left and joined me. And over time, 45 employees from our previous company, Intertech, had left and come and joined us at Ascend Media. So those are the kind of things that can happen if people know they are valued, appreciated, and want to be part of a much more healthy corporate culture.
Fascinating. Fascinating because I always talk to senior leaders that their culture and their team is and always will be a reflection of them. So what sort of example do you want to set? What sort of value do you hold? Are you leading the company with an iron fist, or are you leading the company with a level of ethics and integrity and genuine care for your people? Because that will come through in everything that you do. And it's interesting that you mentioned there that a change in senior leadership at the corporate level all of a sudden has a flow-on effect to maybe people not as being as engaged as perhaps they were, which leads people to make an educated buying decision, really, to say as to whether this is the culture I want to continue to be at or not. And they'll go to a place where they feel valued and they can make a contribution and they can get recognized for. And the recognition, I'll be interested in your take on this. The recognition doesn't necessarily have to be financial. That might play a part, but there's a lot of other things that can be really important from a recognition point of view. What are your thoughts on that? Having worked in a lot of different organizations, but bought and sold a lot, and I guess consulted to those who do.
Yeah. Yeah, so two things there. I would say that the 45 former employees who came and joined our new company, not a single one of them was paid more money than they were
Okay.
making at the previous company. So it wasn't about dollars and cents. It was about work-life balance. It was about being with part of a quality team.
Mm.
And I've seen many cases where senior managers, particularly the CEO or the president, who's ever, whatever the title is at the top, they don't place value on establishing a productive, harmonious, attractive corporate culture.
Yeah.
And it's actually, ironically, by not doing that, it's actually a decision on corporate culture anyway.
That's
So
right.
it's far better off to be a purpose driven decision to define what you want that corporate culture to be and then go about the process of executing on that corporate culture
Mm.
and making it valuable and a value and a priority for your entire senior management team if you're doing that.
Mm.
And coupled with that, there's an old expression, I have no idea where it came from, but the expression goes like this: the fish rots from the head. In my previous company, where I left when new senior management came in, was a textbook example of that, where the senior management of the parent company in New York created a very corrosive environment, which caused our company, Intertech, to lose a significant number of really good, really smart, really talented people. And it ultimately drove the value of that company down astoundingly in a very short period of time, or 2 or 3 years. So it can have a really significant economic impact on a business.
Mm. And I'm sure the people that came in from New York probably thought, hey, this is how to run a company. We know what we're doing. Well, obviously, we have the wrong people. There must be market conditions that are causing this without actually looking in the mirror to say, well, they've caused that because they've brought in a corrosive environment. Staggering.
Yeah.
Staggering.
Yeah. They took the attitude of, I'm right, you're wrong, it's my way or the highway.
Wow.
And it just wasn't consistent with our style because they never bothered to read or value that.
And if they had and you just mentioned there that the ego and arrogance cannot be in the environment. Otherwise, what you'll see is what you've just described. And it seems that there was a lot of ego and a lot of arrogance that were in that particular situation that they saw the runs on the board in terms of the business dropping and
Yeah.
going backwards. You mentioned also in that the importance of stop, start, continue, and I love the way you framed it because you started with what should we continue to do or keep doing, what should we start to do, and what should we stop to do. And you did that at the end, the stop doing. So, was there
Correct.
psychology behind that you've noticed through your experience that you always start with presupposing that we're doing something well? So, what should we continue to do, right? And this comes into, I guess, a level of um, empathy and curiosity to say, obviously, you guys are doing something well. Let's understand that. That enabled people to look at the glass being half full rather than glass half empty, because the stop part often has a negative connotation. And it's interesting that when you start with what should we stop doing as the first question, I find that it often diminishes or minimizes creativity. Was there a reason why that little process of stop, start, keep, you started with keep and then start and then stop? Was there psychology behind it?
Yeah, absolutely. It was quite calculated. And to your point, Darren, if you start with a negative, it's real easy for people to, excuse my French, bitch about stuff, complain about stuff,
Yeah.
and go on a negative rant. So that's why we deliberately placed that third. But the other factor is, as we've talked about in terms of adapting or adopting critical components of the company being acquired's corporate culture or things that they valued, you want to know what those things are right up front. And I'll give you a very, very compelling example. So before I moved in, became an investment banker with Raincatcher, I was under a 3-year management contract, as I mentioned at the beginning, to do a very difficult turnaround on a failing $60 million charitable business.
Hmm.
It was dysfunctional in many regards. And I walked into that setting and I had some immediate assumptions of where I could cut costs and save money because we really had to cut costs.
Hmm.
We had to reorganize things. We had to introduce a whole new technology platform. So we're going to have to reinvest in that area. And I identified several what I considered low hanging fruit that, boom, I was going to go in first month or two, start making these radical changes. And I went through literally 220 of these start, stop, keep meetings in my office, just me and the employee.
Yeah.
And I learned two things immediately. The number one thing that I was going to eliminate was the number one thing of high value to all of those employees. And the number two thing that I thought was the most critical problem in the company was a problem, but it wasn't even remotely close to where the real cancer was in the business.
Hmm.
And it would have taken me months to root that out if I hadn't gone through that process. So it literally turned my integration and change strategy upside down. And
Mm.
if I had executed on what I originally thought, we would have had huge cultural problems, and I probably would have lost credibility as the new CEO from day one.
Yeah. Interesting process. And that's interesting that sometimes we can make an assumption based on what we think we see, but until you talk to people who are in the day-to-day operations and get a real appreciation, and I love the fact that you did it one-on-one because that would have taken a lot of time, Cam. Right? So it
It
would have been
did.
easier for you to do a town hall and stand up in front of everybody and say, "We're doing this. Come with me. We're going to the promised land." Right? Or do small group sessions where you can get some feedback and run some collaboration sessions. But even that, you'll have people that won't necessarily want to share things because maybe somebody else is a boss, is a colleague, is connected to somebody else, or we don't want to say things in front of different people. So that would have been a big investment of time, but I'm sure looking back, it's a big investment that was well worth it because, as you said, you changed your strategy and were able to turn the business around.
Yeah. The return on that investment of time is huge. And to create an ongoing uh, connection with employees, because I don't care who the CEO is, most employees are like intimidated by that person
Yeah.
because it's their, they're the boss, they're the big
Mm.
boss, they're the title. And you want to try to humanize that. And again, in the Intertech days, we had 23 regional offices around the country. And you can't get to all 23 in a year, but you try to touch on as many as you can. And
Mm.
my other C-level team members we divide and conquer to get around those offices. But we had a practice which I incorporated in the charitable company turnaround that I called lunch lottery. So I would have our head of HR literally draw 5 names out of a hat,
Yep.
any position in the company. And I would once a month go to a local kind of a casual restaurant, sort of bar grill place.
Yep.
We'd get a big round table and I would sit there. We might have somebody from the warehouse. We might have the CFO. We could
Yep.
have an editor, whoever it might be. So they were all intermixed at all different levels, different seniority, different tenures with the company. Most of them did not even know each other, didn't even
Mm.
know their names.
Mm. Yeah.
So over the course of a lunch, it really wasn't about business. It was about establishing personal connections and relationships. And you would find these amazing commonalities and interests of these people that had never run across each other.
Yeah.
And oftentimes out of that, interesting conversation arose that I neither tried to manage or manipulate that created interesting ideas or opportunities or where problems had existed.
Mm.
But everybody left knowing each other more as a human being and not just another employee of the company. And that was part of the culture that we tried to establish.
I love that. And again, that takes effort. It takes time, and maybe it does. Going to a restaurant, it does take cost. But just think about what that does. So for people listening to this, if you've got a relatively large organization, it you might have to do that a bit more at scale. But the concept is everybody's an equal person. There's no hierarchy. And if you think about the concept of the round table, when the knights of the round table got together, they were all equals, even though there might have been a hierarchy in the knighthoods. But to have a CFO, for example, sitting at the same table as the head of marketing and maybe a person that works in the distribution center, as an example, having a conversation as a human being, you start to break down some of those silos and some of those barriers, and you start to build a network around human beings that can augur well for when they go back into the business because we've now got those connections established. It sounds so simple, but as you've described it, it could be so profound.
Yeah, it really can be. A
Fascinating.
couple of thoughts for you. I know you're probably going to be running short on time, so a couple of things that I think could really be helpful or valuable for your audience in terms of identifying and hiring talent, salespeople in particular, but any level of position. So, in my philosophy was always there's a human tendency to hire in our own image.
Mm,
And I made a deliberate effort not to do that. I wanted an eclectic workforce. And I'm not just talking about, race, religion, gender, those kind of typical factors. I wanted to hire in any position intelligent, interesting people. That's particularly true of salespeople.
mm,
And for my senior team, I always felt like my greatest talent was to identify really smart people and be willing to surround myself with really smart people,
yeah.
not to be the smartest person in the room.
Mm,
And if you run a servant leadership style of management, your job is to empower those talented people and give them the tools they need to excel in their area of specialization. But the last question I would always ask them in the interview process is, if I hire you, will you be afraid to disagree with me? Because I don't always get it right. And my end goal is for it to be right.
yeah.
I didn't want yes men. I
Mm,
wanted people who would challenge me, give
yeah.
me a different argument. I may not agree with it, I may not adopt their idea, but I wanted to be challenged. And probably 70%, maybe 80% of the time, I adjusted my decision or sometimes completely changed it based on the input I received from my experts in
Mm,
each area of discipline.
yeah.
On the sales, hiring salespeople, the same approach applied. My goal was to hire interesting, intelligent people uh, from different walks of life, different styles. I didn't want a cookie cutter approach. And I had a very eclectic team that approached sales in very different ways. But
Mm,
if they had the ability to be empathetic and listen far more than they spoke, then they almost always became extremely successful in the process. And I believe that uninteresting people who don't have, whether they like, and I didn't care what it was, they like to cook, they like to read, they like to go to movies, they're big workout people, whatever. I
yeah.
just wanted to see people that didn't go home and sit down like a blob after they got off work, because that made them far more engaging in
Yeah.
customer relationships.
Yeah. I love that. And they're simple ones. And I'm glad you preempted that question because I was about to ask you that. So thank you. There's no auto cue here. See? Was there something behind me that says, "Hey, ask a question about talent identification"? But I love that, and I'm very much of the same thought process, making sure that we don't employ people who are very similar to us because we end up potentially developing a one-dimensional team. And I just think of my own sales teams that I've built. You don't have a group of me because you won't necessarily get the results. So bringing people in that are different is fascinating, and I
Yeah,
fully agree with that. And also having empathy and a great listener because uh, the common thing, the common belief out there from most people that I speak to around salespeople is they have to have the gift of the gab. They need to be able to talk. And I say no. Some of the best salespeople I've had working for me and I've worked with, they're actually introverts, but they have an attention to detail and an incredible ability to listen and to be present and ask great questions. And then they know when to shut up. And they are very, very successful. So it's not always the town what do they call them? The town caller or whatever it is that
yeah,
gets the chocolates. Um, Cam, I wanted to also ask you because we spoke briefly before we press record about the importance of succession planning, and I'm sure this is really critical in the work that you do now when it comes to helping entrepreneurs prepare companies for sale. From your experience, and we've talked a lot about identifying talent and building good cultures and integrating people into the new way of doing things to help facilitate growth. Can you just leave us with some thoughts on the importance of succession planning and when you get to a position, making sure that the long-term sustainability of the team or the business is in good hands when it's time for the leader to move. And how
Yeah.
important is that for a
Thank you.
sustainable organization?
Yeah. Thank you for that setup on that one. It's a topic that is really dear to my heart, and sometimes it's absolutely heartbreaking because again, our firm at Raincatcher, we represent privately held companies, family-owned companies, at the time that they decide they need to sell. Because in this day and age, and I know I've talked to enough people in Australia that I know it's happening there as well. The children of these business owners don't want to go in to their family or their parents' business. So those
Mm,
owners are left with one choice, and that's to sell the company.
mm,
And one of the very big detractors we see that either decreases value when these companies are sold, or in many cases keeps them from being sellable, is a business owner who doesn't delegate or doesn't have a succession plan. And most significantly, a lot of these companies are successful because the owner is the key salesperson in the company and or still owns the vast majority of the customer relationships.
mm.
And that's a huge red flag for buyers because when owners sell, that's because they may be willing to go through a transition period, but they want to retire.
Yeah.
And owner or buyers are scared of what would happen to the company if they lose those relationships.
Mm.
So business owners really need to understand the value of having a successor to manage the business and not being super reliant or the sole source of success by closing deals and having customer relationships.
Mm. Such an important thing. And even in my own experience, I went from being a individual contributor salesperson in a corporate business to business sales team in a big telecommunications company here in Australia to then being the sales manager of the exact same team. So I went from peer to sales manager. It took a little bit of time, but literally when the trigger was pulled, one day I was a peer, next day I was a manager. And I never forget my very first conversation with my general manager of sales. The first day I put my sales leadership hat on, he said, firstly, welcome to sales leadership. Welcome to the bottom rung of the ladder. But you know what? The question he asked me after that came, he said, Darren, who is your likely successor?
Exactly.
It wasn't about what's your plan for the growth of the team. He said, who is your likely successor? And I never ever forgotten that. And that's pretty much shaped my entire approach to sales leadership because you don't want to be an island. You do not want to be the reason why your team or your business is successful. You want to be able to leverage and hopefully replicate yourself so that the sustainability of the team doesn't always just rely on you. So I've never forgotten that. I'm glad that's something that's dear to your heart as well because you would see this often.
Yeah. And the other benefit there is if you have a strong successor behind you and you have done a super job of training and mentoring that individual, it creates a much greater likelihood that you yourself can progress up the ladder of growth inside that same company because they're not as scared of what's going to happen to sales if
Mm.
you leave that position.
Totally. So I keep saying to sales teams and sales leaders and leaders, make yourself redundant. Your role as a leader is to make yourself redundant. And I've got to be careful sometimes when I say that because when companies go through the obvious dips and sometimes redundancies mean you leave the company, it's not that, right? You leave your team in such a great position that there's always going to be opportunities for you because you'll be recognized for what you've created. So I love that.
Exactly right. Exactly
So
right.
Cameron, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I greatly appreciate you coming on. If there was one piece of advice that we haven't covered that was top of mind that you wish I have asked you about, what would that be before I ask you where people can connect with you?
Sure. Well, there's one topic that always comes up when it relates to salespeople, and that's around compensation matters. So, my two philosophies on sales compensation or compensation in general are you get the behavior that you incentivize.
Mm,
So, that makes the structure of base salary and commission or bonus plans critical in the process. And I had the great fortune for 15 years of working for an absolutely brilliant man who was the chairman of our former parent company when I was with Intertech. Uh, that He would always say to me when we would go to New York to present a company we were acquiring, he would want to know what the compensation package for the key positions were and how we were going to structure those. And, we were always trying to be very conservative and save money. And he would just stop me and he would say, Cam, pay peanuts, get monkeys. You want to pay a competitive, it's not about, you don't want to pay them over the top, but you want to pay a competitive compensation package to get the behavior that you're incentivizing and to retain that valuable talent.
Yeah.
So I've always just remembered that. Very simple. Pay peanuts, get monkeys.
And we don't want monkeys because monkeys, can be unpredictable. I love that. Love that. So, Cam, where can people learn about you and where can they connect with you to learn about yourself, but also Raincatcher?
Sure. I'd love to hear from your listeners, particularly if you or someone you know is thinking seriously about or ready to sell a business. We work in every kind of industry you can imagine, from high-tech software to heavy construction. You can reach me. My email is cameron.bishop@raincatcher.com. Our corporate website is www.raincatcher.com, or you can easily find me and message me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a conversation. There's no sales pitch, no obligations. We love the opportunity to maybe help offer some advice for you, and because we're passionate about helping business owners today.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I'll put those on the show notes. So, Cameron, it's just clicked over 7 p.m. there in Kansas City. So I greatly appreciate you on a Wednesday afternoon/evening. And I know, having spoken to you just before you press record, there is a vodka waiting for you. So I'm going to let you get to that.
It is, Darren, it is definitely cocktail hour, and I've been talking so much, I'm really thirsty.
So, Cameron, I'm going to let you go and enjoy that cocktail with that vodka. And again, greatly appreciate you being a guest on the Exceptional Sales Leader
It's been
podcast.
a pleasure, Darren. Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you for listening to the Exceptional Sales Leader podcast. I trust the information in this episode has been helpful in your journey towards becoming exceptional. And remember, please take the time to rate the show, subscribe to the show so other people can find it. But also, if I can help you, jump on my calendar, go to leadwithdarren.com and let's have a conversation about how I can help you along your journey to being exceptional.